Thank you, Presiding Officer, and my congratulations to Mark MacDonald and the progress he's made on this issue so far. Now, much of the detail of the bill, and indeed the committee report, has already been covered, so I want to address one or two wider issues which relate to the subject where there may be a need for a change of behaviours consequent upon the passage of the bill. The bill itself is relatively simple, and it's one that's informed by legislation elsewhere in these islands, of which we're part. I think the message from the evidence from the Isle of Man that the committee got tells us keep it relatively simple. Don't try and solve every possible issue that may arise with shading vegetation, because you probably actually can't do that. England tells us that behaviours start to change relatively rapidly after a short settling-in period. People stop creating monster hedges that cause disputes. Now, does that mean that naturally, not necessarily consciously, disputatious people simply find something else to argue with their neighbours about? Now, the jury doesn't seem to have much evidence to suggest that. There's certainly little evidence that the creation of a law like this before us can make things worse by creating new casus belli, new battlefronts in which antagonistic neighbours can engage. The evidence appears to lead in a different direction, a lowering of the temperature generally in neighbouring disputes. So what more can be done to capitalise on the opportunity for reasonable debate on issues between neighbours? Firstly, perhaps planners and architects, and Colin Keir in his contribution made reference to that, should have in their approach to their job a greater emphasis as they make design choices on choices that will, by design, reduce potential for tensions. For example, sightlines from windows and conservatories that little impact on what others see as their privacy. Perhaps a little less straight lines of houses, a little bit of wiggle, so that windows are less likely to look into other people's properties. Perhaps clever use of blank-facing walls close to each other, so there's genuine space on the other side of a house plot. And I'm sure there's going to be much, much more. The real point is, on the back of this, the professionals should be thinking about this. Now, very few house purchases happen without a lawyer being party to it. Perhaps lawyers should consider advising their clients. Perhaps a simple leaflet produced by the Scots Law Society might suffice on behaviours that will avoid tensions with neighbours and drawing attention to this Act. Indeed, in many housing developments, perhaps the simple inclusion in the title deeds that restricts some of the behaviours and defines how boundaries may be delineated could, in some circumstances, be helpful. There are perhaps opportunities where Council is visiting in one area where a problem... Yes, ma'am?
Christine Graham.
It's just as a piece of information that there already are conditions put into some developments called deeds of conditions that do prohibit certain kind of fencing and barriers.
I'm aware of that from personal experience, and that's precisely why I think there is a case for looking at this legislation and seeing how we can use the experience of here to help. The councils, too, when they're in areas dealing with this kind of problem, can look for potential issues, perhaps, and officials help there. On the sub-ledge issues, I think in the power to modify high hedges, it's perhaps just a simple matter of picking up what's in the ancillary condition provision of the bill, where it says, in consequence of and relating to the Act. If we put that into high hedges, I think some of the concerns of sub-ledge are likely to be addressed. Now, this issue does appear to be a largely urban issue. It seems to be one that affects areas of greater rainfall where things grow faster, but the regionality of the impact is not an excuse for inaction. I may be the only member, I cannot recall ever having had an approach, but I have a constituency with people with large plots in rural areas, quite different. But I absolutely recognise in the evidence I heard in committee that this is precisely the kind of bill we should be progressing, precisely the kind of opportunity for a member. And I very much welcome government support for this bill. I look forward to its passage in due course and happy to support it.